it was funny to see Waldemar showing his prototype. He worked on it in a simple, editorial editing program, like I think MS Publisher or something like that. Very simple stuff. So you had that board with connections and spaces, and then he was so excited when he came back to the booth at Essen, bringing the bags of wooden toys, wooden little trucks, saying this is gonna be a game. Like, you're just buying toys, mate. What is going on here?
Welcome to Cardboard Creations, where we discuss the process, techniques, and inspiration for designing board games. I'm your host, Candice Harris, and I'm super excited to be here with Jaro and Waldemar from PHALANX to find out how Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine was created. But first, let's jump into a brief overview of how Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine works. Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine is a new edition of 1944 Race to the Rhine, which is an operations and logistics-focused Euro war game based on historical events of the year 1944. You and up to 3 opponents take on the roles of commanders of different sections of the Allied forces, and your goal is to liberate France and the Low Countries and move your forces onwards across the Rhine and into Nazi Germany. During the game, you'll move your corps by spending fuel, gain and transport supplies, and deal with Axis units who try to interfere with your plans. You win the game immediately if you're the first player to place a control marker in a victory space across the Rhine, but if the end of the game is triggered from the last Axis marker being placed, the winner is the player with the most medals. Hi Waldemar, hi Jaro, welcome to the show.
Hello, Candice.
Hi.
I am an Omni gamer, so I love all types of different board games, like Euro games, war games, everything in between. And I'm always impressed when I find games that are kind of hybrids and kind of blend mechanisms or cross genres. So, with Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine, it's a game that's based on a historical war and it's a historical setting, but then it has it's not really a war game. It has all these logistics and planning and resource management, and there's a race element to it. So it feels very unique. So I gotta know, sure. What initially inspired you guys to create Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine?
Oh, that is Waldemar to answer.
I wanted to create a game which is more accessible, which is historical based, but I can play with my wife, so it avoids killing, so it's more focus on logistics. I mean, something which is quite close to the typical Euro games like pick up and deliver.
Sure.
You have to manage staff management, but to be attractive, I think that it also should be based in World War II. And one of the interesting themes, which is quite interesting for the Americans, I mean, just the most important market that we want to hit on, is the story what happened between the Normandy landing and the Battle of the Bulge. So, and it turned out that it must be so boring for wargamers that there were no games at all covering this subject.
Ah, that's cool. So unique mechanisms and kind of a unique approach to something that happened in World War II.
I like how he thought about the game, and there was a thought process. It was not just like, I'm going to make a game about this or that. No, it was like a thought process. I want to make a game that fits, that ticks the boxes. And I think that is very mature of a designer to do it.
Sure. So how did you go from, this initial inspiration into a playable prototype?
Yeah, so prototype was created digitally, but there was one important piece that I had to bring from Essen, because I wanted to use those track meeples, which are about 1 inch. I wanted to create a point-to-point map, but using also not only the points, but also the connections between the points. And the challenge was to find a proper scale to fit on a regular board, and then to be carefully choosing the points so there is a distance of 1 inch, so you can put your tracks in between. And of course, this game is kind of card driven. I mean, just that cards are the effects that you follow. So it's a kind of adventure experience. I mean, just you don't know what's looking there. So I also had to create the deck of cards.
It was funny to see Waldemar showing his prototype. He worked on it in a simple, editing program, like I think MS Publisher or something like that. Very simple stuff. So you had that board with connections and spaces, and then he was so excited when he came back to the booth at Essen, bringing the bags of wooden toys, wooden little trucks, saying this is gonna be a game. Like, you're just buying toys, mate. What is going on here? And then in a half a year later, he's showing this to us as a already working prototype. So it was really cool. Honestly, it was just a map that was glued together, if I remember, or maybe printed in one piece, but simple, cheap paper, and ready-made components taken from Spielmateriale, I think that's called.
Yeah, Spielmateriale. It's a very great shop and a must go for any of other, let's say,
and the cards were made in Word or some other
components.
program like that. It was a very simple thing. You don't need a lot to create a prototype that you can start to enjoy. You can draw on paper. You can do anything. You can do it in the computer, but we like to have it physical because we make board games.
Right.
So we like to see the presence, how much space does it take, how you sit around it, how you move things around.
Yeah, that's all very, very important. So when it came to creating the re-implementation of Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine, did you start with like the original game board and then make a prototype of the add-on extension, or?
The story goes like that. We published the 1944 Race to the Rhine, and then it got some traction. It became a little popular, got some rewards here and there, but it was sitting on the shelf, and we thought like, it's not going to happen again. We're not going to publish. And then we went to Paris, and I've met Yves Roy, who is now a co-designer, and who apparently loved the game. He loved the system. He loved it so much that he created an additional expansion, a fourth player.
Because the original game is 1 to 3 players.
1 to 3.
Right.
And that was like a fourth player, full blown fourth player. That was actually like more advanced fourth player for someone who already knows the game there, because there is no more mechanics and so on. And he presented this to me on a large table at Paris Ludique, on open air event in Paris. Beautiful, July. And there was the map board of Race to the Rhine, which is quite large already, was positioned on a table. There was another table, and the other map was joining, was the same size, it was so huge. And I thought like, it's an interesting concept, but it's not going, nobody's going to actually set it up. It's not working. It's not, there is an idea, but it's not working.
Too big, even for the big American tables. Yeah.
Yeah. Like who's gonna, and that was because of the geography, the maps were aligned at the angle. So now you're doing something the war gamers do sometimes, but it's even for them it's awkward. And now you want the general public to do it, to accept this. It's not going to happen. Right, so it took us like a couple of years to turn that thing into a panel that joins with the original map, that keeps the connections in place, but it's not true to the scale with the main map.
Gotcha.
But it works.
Yeah. Very cool.
It fits the table.
Yeah, it fits the table.
Yeah. So that was a lot of like how can we get it done? And we couldn't find an answer. And one day we're like, I know how to do it.
Very cool.
You just let your brain work, and it does give you amazing answers.
How much play testing was done for Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine and or the original game? And like, what's your playtesting process like?
So much more playtesting was done on the original game because it was quite a new concept. So the initial stage made by, let's say, my playtesters groups in Opole, it was fellows who came to play normal games. So first they had to be attracted. Okay, now don't play this nice looking games. Let's play our my ugly prototype. Thank you guys for this. But it was the first stage of, I would say, crash testing. I mean, just checking if the initial concept works. But later on, when the group was saying, this game is okay, you can actually publish it, we passed it to Jaro and his Warsaw group. And they saw a lot of issues which the initial, let's say, the group number one hasn't noticed. And this group, they made a lot of changes to the, let's say, something that we are mostly happy. I was happy because it solved, well, it worked, yeah. But then Jaro's input was, it works, but it's kind of slow. We can make it faster. But later on, we passed it for testing for another groups, because there was also the level that the Warsaw, let's say, plastic group was happy. So so you pass the prototype to another people just to say if they can find something more. So it's just a word of advice from our experience. You should have different group of testers initialized at different stages of the design, because after, I don't know, 5 or 10 games, people, they don't see. They see, okay, they made an input, and for them, the game was perfect. For the other, you say, oh, it's still undeveloped. Yeah, a promising project, but you should work on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why playtesting is so important, and it's great that you guys were kind of passing it to different groups to get feedback. How do you I guess consume that feedback? Like, do you have people just tell you live and you kind of take notes, or are you having people submit a survey? And I know also, like, Jaro, you kind of focused a little more on the development side. So I'm just curious to hear a little more about that back and forth.
I'll tell you, with historical games, it's quite easy. Well, it's not easy at all, but at least you have a reference.
It's like, what? Oh, yeah.
Yes, I second Mark Herman here, who says, I designed historical game because it's easy. It's not easy, of course. That's just a line, but what it means, you have a point of reference. If you go with science fiction or fiction in general, or something that just basically imagination, then the problem is you're working in an unstable environment. Anything can change. Anything can be different. There is no reason why things should be this or that way. It's only what is your thinking. While with historical games, the brilliant part is that we actually have historical scenario that developed, and the designer needs only to answer the question, do I really want to recreate it, and how much of freedom do I? These are a lot of more questions to the subject. How much of a freedom do I want to give to the players, so they don't recreate history, but they have the feeling of playing historical games. So for me, the playtesting was quite simple. I wanted to follow historical storyboard. So I took historical storyboard of how these guys advanced, where did they go, and how did they get there, whom were they fighting with, and what were the historical kind of events between now and 90 minutes later when we're about to finish the game, right? Because we were supposed to play the game for 90 minutes. So I wanted to have, in 90 minutes, I wanted to be from here to the Rhine, and to have, in order to get it, I know that going one by one won't get me there, because there'll be too many things to do. So I had I need to be there in 7, maybe 8, maybe 9 moves. But there is 27 connections or 30 spots. So that is 3 spots per movement, right?
Gotcha.
So
yeah,
that's how we developed. We took the historical storyboard, so this is where I am. This is where I want to be at the end. Here we go.
Yeah, and then taking it to different playtesting teams to get different perspectives on it.
And then, yes, and then it started when we designed, because this game is, the uniqueness at the time when it was designed was actually, it was each of the players were asymmetrical, so each of them plays differently, and that was the challenge as well, which helped it to make it more attractive, because you can play different roles, different kind of personalities within the same system.
Gotcha. So at what point did you start documenting rules?
The rules at the beginning was just like one page, to be honest. After the initial after the presentation of the game with Waldemar, he said, "This is how it plays. These are the components. This is the map. These are the pieces." And I said, like, let's try. Do you have any rules? Like, oh, I can write you rules. And he wrote like one page of rules. And so we had a discussion in a live document, when I said, this needs to be adjusted, needs to be changed, and so on.
Gotcha.
And then he answered.
But initially you were kind of just going off of or more of a summary document.
Yeah,
and that was enough to get you going with playtesting and everything.
And that was very simple. It was really simple at the beginning.
Because we know that it's going to change.
Right.
Through the playtest. So you need to have to know what are the basic rules. You don't have to just start writing down the very detailed rulebook, because it's going to change anyway. But you have the basic mechanism, and if you are not creating anything new, you can actually just, you move. Yeah, you move. So how far can you move? What happens if you encounter something like this?
It's like if you created a player aid.
More of a player aid. Gotcha.
This is how we actually call it now in a company. You want to bring a new game to us? Don't write a rule book. Write a player aid, because we can take it from there. And then the exact wording, like, all this fluffy stuff that we need to have in a rule book, because we need to assume that there is someone who never played any game and comes to the table and like, I want to learn that one. How can I learn? So, for us, we're in the industry for years. Player aid, the shorter it is, the better.
Yeah.
When you play a game, you don't sit with a rule book.
Hopefully not. Some games you need to.
Yeah. But
if it has a good player aid, you don't have to.
But what you want to have is to have a good player aid in your hand that refers you.
Absolutely.
So what can you do, and what are your options, and what are the important stuff? Sometimes when you're playtesting the game, sometimes you don't have a rule for some situations. Just the players say, "Hey, Waldek, we have a situation like this. What should we do?"
What do we do?
And that's how we use feedback, because when you start with a player aid, which is the simplest rule book you can have, the situation in the game will arise, which needs an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you start feeling.
What else? Fill in those gaps and define.
Rather than trying to create whole the system, you actually start moving around and playing.
In order for a game to be interesting, attracting for the gamers, as a designer, it's a challenge, because you give the players the pieces, the opportunities, but they are not so narrow ways. So there is only one move that you should do, because or otherwise that may say, because such games is boring. So so you want to create let's say rules how to do it, then create an options, but then I believe it's beyond your imagination what players can do with this power and possibilities.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just chime in and say I think the player aid for Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine is great. And I love that when games have a player aid where after you learn the rules, you really only need that player aid to play the game, so you can actually focus on the game. So that totally makes sense that's kind of your approach.
We took it as a company philosophy now, that all of our games now have concise player aid that is sufficient to play once you are familiar with the game itself.
Cool. And what were some of, you're coming at a unique approach with creating this game that's not quite like any other game that we're aware of, that was created at the time. And you have asymmetrical kind of factions in the game. So I'm sure there were a lot of different challenges, but what would you say were some of the biggest challenges you guys faced when you were designing and developing Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine?
The first biggest challenge was to create a system of, let's say, tick-tocking clock. Because the initial design was, okay, everything should be governed, because I didn't want to have just to be approachable, some like turns, phases, etc., all the stuff, just so the game flows and it ends when it should end. Just when the card runs out. Yeah, so everything was in one deck. So you have the cards which are now called the pursuit cards. Just some kind of opportunities, and some cards of the axis units that you are struggling with the defense. But it was such a brilliant idea, just to have something like the encounters. But the players were more clever than me, because they say, okay, so if nothing is rushing us, so we're just camping, building up our side, so taking as much supplies as we can, and then driving. Okay, so you have there's no pressure, no time pressure. Okay, so this was okay, so it works. We can move, we can destroy something, but it's ugly slow. It's okay. So I had to. Okay, so what I can do about it? How can I invent something like a clock ticking, but without using, let's say, the typical. Okay, so you have only 10 or something like 20 turns, and then the game ends. Because then you have to count which turn we are in. So then I created, okay, so what we want to do is to have those axis markers that are coming to the board. So first you start the game, okay, nothing, everything, okay, and then you start placing those axis markers, and the number of the axis markers is limited. So when you place the last one, the game ends. Yeah, so it's kind of clock. Yeah, so this was the problem and the solution. Yeah. So and the second point, the second challenge was the pace of movement. So the initial thought was 1 fuel for 1 point movement, and Jaro said, why? You should have the distance of 3 covered with 1 fuel, and later on put all those. If you encounter something, then you have to slow down, or you have a special effect that, like mud, that also forces you to spend more over, so you can really feel the race. Yeah, because there was no race, it was just slowing, moving, like walking. Now
Gotcha.
It's 1944 and we have motorized forces, and we are, as long as we have gas, we can run. And this was the second biggest challenge and the second approach. And the third one was calculating victory points, because there's also the initial system of victory points was kind of complicated once, and then it was also Jaro's input. Hey, we have a nice story, because as a player you are a general, you are Patton, you are Monty, you are Bradley. And what do the generals want? They want to have a bunch of medals. So let's award medals, not just victory points. And this tells a more attractive story, and just the victory points. Okay, if I take this city, I win 5, and if I take Brussels, I win. No, just give it a medal. Yeah.
If we think about it, and we look at there is a book, not a single one, but if you look memories of those generals fighting in commanding in France, you see there were rivalries between them. And they wanted to be considered the most successful general of the campaign. They wanted to be, some of them ended up being presidents, right? So they were after, of course, defeating the enemy and liberating Europe, but also their personal goal was to be successful, be better than others. Very American as well, competitive, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, and there was a rivalry between the British and Americans as well, and the French were kicking in as well. So it was it was political. So how we represent this in a simple way that tells a story, personal story. There is a personal story.
Right.
And that's how the medals were. Because we were like, okay, if you don't cross the Rhine, who wins? If you don't, let's calculate how many kills you had. Like, no, we're not about killing here. About what is the generals, the medals. So the medals.
Right.
kind of victory
Very
points.
nice.
And you can
But
then
yeah,
trade them, you can bet on them as well, because if you remember in the game, you can actually bet those medals on your airborne formations. So you can call
right.
Ike and say, hey, Ike, I'm going to win this war by winter if you give me those airborne troops. It is a perspective on that situation, the output
Sure.
perspective design.
After we have everything running smoothly and we are happy, then there is the final thing is actually the balancing of the game. Yeah, because first you want to have some Chrome. Okay, so Monty, what's his special ability? What is so special about Patton? What is so special about Bradley? Nothing. Yeah, but we have to give it something to the player, and then you have to make sure that all the players have the same chance of winning. Yeah, so you are
Right.
just
So
focusing.
balancing those factions. Yeah.
Okay, so do you think who is more capable of winning? And we finally, through several other playtests, we managed to see. Okay, so the chances are, despite each of the generals starts with different positions, they start with different starting equipment.
Yeah, gotcha. So just balancing out the asymmetrical factions in the game, along with like making sure that tension and you feel the pressure of the race was, solving that was really important. So I guess outside of those big challenges you mentioned and how you guys solved those, were there any other big aha moments as you were designing or developing? Keep them rolling.
I think the medals was a aha moment when we decided that, as explained.
Instead of victory points.
Yeah.
Cool.
Also, aha moment, I think, was generally defining that campaign was not gamed very much.
Well, the aha moment is also how, because just not how the axis system works. I mean, just having that every player is placing one of the axis markers connected together. It created that this, let's say, bot is, let's say, kind of intelligent one. I'm just it's really hard to write down so possible outcomes, because if this is a competitive game and this is the only way that you can harm your opponent, is that you are trying to analyze the situation and put the marker closest to the one who is more capable of winning. You are not
Right.
harming yourself. So there are 2 or 3 players controlling the bot, but if you see the choices made, you say, oh, it's pretty intelligent. I'm just always taking or almost always taking the best possible solution. That so this is something. Okay, so I wanted just to make this to do to players to feel the tension, but it occurs to be quite effective way of having the opponent against the players. Yeah.
So how are the art and graphic design decisions made?
We worked with Piotr Słaby, who was the art director responsible for bringing us Hannibal and Hamilcar, and we loved that really, really. Later, he did it for us later. At the beginning, it was one of his first attempts, and he said he loved the game so much. He said, "I'll bring something to you," and he
Oh,
brought
cool.
a project first based on the traditional German operational maps, and then we've turned it into more commercial outlook, drawing from original American corpse books. They had like corp comics when they described how they had fun in France, and like we thought that is a kind of light way of showing it, because this is a logistical game. We don't want to be very war gamey here. We want to be more on telling a story, telling in a comic way. We also used the original photographs recolored to have that
Right.
feeling of news, as if we were reading a news or looking at the pictures. And that all worked together very nicely with the wood components. It's light. The light colors bright colors for the units, and I think the presence is amazing still today.
So when and how did you guys come up with the name Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine? You know, I mean, yeah.
we had Monty versus Patton, I think. Monty, what was it, Waldemar? Was it Monty versus Patton?
It was Monty versus Patton, but because it was to be the story of the generals.
Yeah.
So
but somehow, Monty Python and Monty versus Patton didn't ring well, and we thought that race element is important, and the Rhine is important. So the race to the Rhine, it has the R and R, race to the Rhine. It sounds
Alliteration,
nice.
yeah.
So that was the title of the first one, which is up there, the first box, and the second one. When we developed Race to the Rhine, we came across the concept of keep them rolling was the term used by Americans. Keep the trucks rolling, and when they had the red ball on the signs for the trucks to follow, and we thought keep them rolling would be nice name for the series of games, because we have more than one now. We have Keep Them Rolling Race to the Rhine, we have Race to Moscow, and there are like 2 more in the works, or 3 more in the works.
Cool. So when did you guys know that the game was finished and ready to be produced? I don't recall if it was crowdfunded or if you just had a pre-order.
We just went full ahead, and we risked our own money with production. There was no Kickstarter at the time. It was the first project that we did internationally. So that was a game which transitioned us from being a local company into an international one. And
wow.
We somehow knew it is ready. It was gut feeling, guts feeling that we knew that's ready. However, probably, as they say, the game's never finished, they only published. So, the moment you publish, we thought like, oh, we can have an expansion now. And we did a little expansion. And then Yves and his friends came up with the 4th player. So you see, keep going and keep develop. The question is where to stop.
So, and this could be for either of you or both of you or whoever has an answer, but I always like to ask an advice question. Do you guys have any advice for someone who might be interested in designing a historical board game, possibly based on a war, but that's not a war game?
Well, follow our footsteps. I think currently there is a lot of discussion on how to show historical stuff in a non-war gamey way, and there is a general agreement that we can produce different types of games which are about history but not about war. However, the question will always be, is there going to be a conflict? And do we consider conflict as something that is bad or something that is actually good? Not necessarily the type of conflict when we lose lives or property or something, but is conflict as part of a human nature something that is pushing us forward or something that is dragging us back? Even if you look at historical situations like wars, of course, there was a lot of people who died and who had, but if you look at science was a leap forward. Every war was like, wow, we got a lot of money to do something new because the military demanded. And then it went to the civilian life. So, at every subject you can have multiple views. And I think there's plenty of things you can do with games. Just don't be afraid to be different and to look for unusual ways of showing things. So following our footsteps, not literally making more games in the system, but not being afraid of creating something that does not exist yet.
There should be some some interesting story. I mean, the history has a lot of interesting stories. Yeah, they are pretty unique, and it's hard to imagine things. If you have a good story to tell, then you'll find a way of, let's say, presenting this and finding or creating proper mechanisms to do it. I mean,
cool,
so
awesome.
if you have some message to tell to the world, you can also do it in the form of a game.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks so much, Waldemar and Jaro. It was really great to hear, the whole backstory for, we kind of covered 1944 Race to the Rhine and Keep 'em Rolling Race to the Rhine. But it's great to hear the backstory because, being that this new version came from an original version, which has its own story, it's nice to kind of hear all of it all together. So thanks so much for sharing. And it's also nice to hear both perspectives of, from one of the core designers and the core developer all together. But is there, I know, Jaro, you just kind of hinted that there might be more on the way in this kind of race series you guys are doing. But is there, anything you wanted to mention that's coming down the pike in this world?
I think the one that is most expected is Race to Tokyo, which puts you in a position of commanders of the Far East theater, of Asian theater during the Second World War. So we keep to the setting in terms of Second World War, but we introduce 3 different factions. We have the British and MacArthur and Nimitz trying to reach Tokyo ahead of each
you
other.
have army and navy. Yeah, so you have the Brits, the army, and the navy. Three factions.
And I think that's gonna be a great way of expanding the system into the regions where we never thought originally possible.
Right. Oh, that's exciting.
There's also Waldemar is also working on First Gulf War, which is very modern, but also very logistical approach. I was working for some time on a Napoleonic system, which would be using the same concept. The first sketches were done, but then life took over. Maybe one day.
Right.
So I think that the system is very potent, and it answers the question of military operations in a more interesting way. Well, we were avid war gamers for years, but the concept of anything can move anytime, wherever you want, always bugged us, because that's not exactly how it is. So the system that puts limitations on your activations, that makes it without any further subsystem, or actually any system that is ruling it, like limited activations or anything. You're limited only by what you've got in terms of logistics.
Right.
And that is the beauty of it. You cannot move if you don't have fuel. You cannot fight if you have no ammo, and you cannot do anything if you have no food. That simplicity explains a lot, and I think this could be done. It could be used to any historical setting, just with slight moderation, changes or amplifications to the system. So I see a lot of potential in it.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing how this, series evolves. And, hopefully more people, because this is so accessible and kind of a crossover in the Euro gaming space, and you just focused on logistics and planning so much, but also with that exciting race element, hopefully more people will check it out, especially as the series evolves. So thank you both for being here. It was really great talking to you.
Thank you, Candice. All the best.
Thank you all for watching Cardboard Creations. Hopefully it's been as inspiring and fascinating for you as it has been for me. And remember, the only way to get something done is to start doing it. Boom.